This is Paul Hembekides, better known as Hembo. He is the content director for ESPN's Get Up morning show and ESPN Radio's Greeny. Recently, we had the opportunity to interview him on the Fifth and Goal podcast. Kind of start by talking about that. How did you end up at ESPN? What was that journey like? And you've been there now almost 10 years. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of your journey to ESPN?
Yeah, I mean, sort of by chance, I ran into a recruiter from the Stats and Information Group when I was working at LaSalle University. It's in North Philadelphia, near where I grew up. I was just working in the SID office, and I kind of got lucky. Had an interview with the worldwide leader. They liked me enough to give me a job. So I started as like an entry-level researcher in, what was that? I guess the summer of 2014. Not long after that, I joined Mike and Mike, which was at that time the morning radio show. And I've been with Mike Greenberg, Greeny, you probably know him as, ever since. I was the last researcher on that show. And I've been on Get Up, which is his morning TV show now, since the day that we launched in April of 2018, I think it was. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell. If you asked me to describe what I do every day, it would be the kind of thing that if you told me I could, when I was 15 years old, do, I would have, peed my pants, for lack of a better expression, because I didn't know such a job existed. Like, I used to play fantasy baseball religiously. I used to wake up in the mornings and listen to Mike and Mike and read the Philadelphia Inquirer sports section cover to cover. Like, that's what I did, probably like you guys grew up doing, to some varying degree. So like, I had no idea such a job existed where you could look up stats and they'd be used on TV. It's a pretty cool gig. I mean, I guess the objective or the goal was to be the Phillies shortstop. That was not despite the fact that I was a prolific walker, that was not an option that was presented to me. So I sort of settled for the next best option, and that was being an ESPN researcher and now an ESPN producer.
I mean, Mike, as you kind of mentioned, has been kind of one of the staples for us growing up, just listening to him in the morning, whether on radio or, his TV show with Mike and Mike, and then Get Up, the last few years too has been awesome. And I always appreciate having the various personalities and stuff, but just maybe just talk a little bit about what it's like working with Mike. And then maybe if you have even a couple favorite like ESPN analysts or former athletes that you really enjoy working with on the show, maybe even somebody that you enjoy stumping with your trivia questions more than some of the others.
Yeah, I mean, look, Greeny is a legend. He started at ESPN when I was like 10 years old, which I often remind him of. He does not appreciate that. And now I'm sitting, 6 feet from him when we do our radio show. So like, it's kind of surreal. It sort of just becomes your life. But I mean, I listened to thousands of hours of Mike and Mike. I never would have imagined I would have been involved in that show or this one in any sense. Greeny is as good at what he does as anybody is in our industry. He's the consummate professional. He's taught me an endless amount about work ethic, an endless amount about how to, siphon information and how to read what people are interested in. He always likes to say he's in the interesting business. And it's been a fascinating journey to sort of learn how the general public consumes sports, and nobody sort of feeds that better than he does. As far as Get Up itself, I would say, I mean, there are any number of people that I enjoy working with. So I'll obviously leave out practically everyone. As far as stumping people, Dan Graziano is the person with whom I have a very spirited trivia rivalry as we stand today. He's up, 14-12 in our season series. He is on the show tomorrow, and so my objective is to hopefully make it a 1-point game. That's TBD. As far as feeding stats or conversing with, I mean, Dan Orlovsky is a person that became a star first and foremost on our show. I'm a huge fan of his work. He and I talk weekly, if not daily, especially during the season. Yeah. And he's someone that always amplifies my work on Twitter, on the show, any number of places. And that's something that I really appreciate, because when you do what I do, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people at ESPN that have the kind of job that I do. Very few of them are granted this sort of exposure, for lack of a better term, that I am, because people buy into the information that I provide them, and there's sort of a payoff on TV, on the radio. And it's kind of a motivational tactic, for lack of a better term, because when you see your work manifest itself on TV every day, it's really rewarding. It's really satisfying. And it's the kind of thing that like doesn't get old. It's weird. Like, I've been at the company for almost 10 years. I remember the very beginning when like Hannah Storm on SportsCenter was reading a full screen copy that I wrote. Like, that's surreal. That's crazy. And then today on Get Up, when Robert Griffin III shouted me out because he used a stat that I provided him this morning, it was as cool as the first day. It's kind of a weird feeling. It's kind of a weird thing. but it's a very satisfying thing. And it's nice that I work for a company and for shows that have people that appreciate and value what I do. And I think that's the kind of thing that sort of makes the world go round.
One of the things that we've noticed as we've started putting out our own content, either through Twitter or most recently, we've gotten random hits on TikTok. We've found different sports fan bases will go off on us at different times for different reasons. And I'm curious what in your experience, 10 years doing this stuff, what's been the most vocal fan base that comes up?
Yeah, so I don't actually have like a kind of answer to that question that you might want, but I do have, I think, an adequate answer that might even be more illustrative of what you're getting at here. So what I have found is that any number of NFL fan bases are very territorial with sort of a tribal rooting interest of their quarterback. So, for example, if I were to put out a negative Lamar Jackson stat, a negative Baker Mayfield stat, and a negative Tua Tagovailoa stat, as if there are any other kind, what you'll find is there will be dozens, hundreds, thousands of troglodytes that will wind up in my mentions or in the mentions of whomever, stat I gave to, and they come to the defense of their player, their quarterback. I saw that firsthand as a Philadelphia fan with Carson Wentz, who was great in 2017, was, for lack of a better term, much less than great in all the subsequent years. And I'm putting it kindly, I'm not a big Carson Wentz fan, as my timeline might suggest. But like what happens is fan bases convince themselves that their quarterback is great, and any deviation from that kind of performance is either you're not seeing it right or this is someone else's fault. So we'll blame the play calling, we'll blame the offensive line, or we'll blame the bias of the network or the bias of the whatever. I would say that from my experience, far and away the most criticism that I receive for anything that I post or that I see that we post is like the passionate NFL fan whose quarterback is attacked justly or unjustly. And I think you could probably find an example in which almost any of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, like there are endless examples of that happening too. And so that's not like a direct answer, because it's not like the Dolphins, or the Browns, or the Ravens, but like it's all of the above. And I think the same goes for most every team and fan base in the NFL.
So shifting from the NFL to baseball, we mentioned it in the intro, you're frequently on Buster Olney's baseball podcast. You're a huge Philadelphia Phillies fan. And so one of the things that we've discussed kind of at length on our show is kind of just the state of the game of baseball, because you hear it all the time, right? You hear that baseball's dying. You hear that they need to market better. And in part, I think some of that's true. But I'm curious, from your perspective, where do you see the game of baseball going maybe in the next 5 years? What's your kind of takeaways, I guess, from that?
Yeah, so I could spend hours and hours talking about this, and who knows, maybe we will. But I would say that fundamentally, baseball's soul, for lack of a better term, right now is kind of up for debate. Like I think it's being sort of wrestled with, because you have like a collection of passionate baseball fans that have loved it their whole lives. We can call them the old school crowd, that want the game to be the way it was when they were a kid, because things were always better when you were younger. There is a collection of younger people who love the StatCast metrics on the broadcast, that love bat flips, that love the City Connect uniforms, whatever, right? And to me, like the push and pull between those sides is a fundamentally good thing. There's no obvious reason to me why those conversations are bad for baseball. What's of more concern to me is the product on the field interesting? Is it fun? Is it entertaining? Like baseball, Bill James is a legendary, baseball statistician, one of the best known people that does what I do and is sort of the godfather of my profession. He said something once that I just absolutely love. And he said, baseball is meant to be enjoyed. It serves no other purpose. And I feel like so often now we let stuff get in the way of that. Right. I mean, that doesn't mean, we should determine the winner of a game in extra innings by a home run derby, but it does mean that we should be doing whatever we can to optimize baseball's enjoyment factor. And in my judgment, that means more balls in play. It means a faster paced game, sort of all the obvious stuff that Major League Baseball and its fans have made obvious. We need to go in this direction. So right now it's incumbent upon Rob Manfred and leadership in the Players Association to be able to put their disagreements aside and mutually come to agreements on ways that we can, like objectively, obviously make baseball a better game. The problem is in the latest round of CBA negotiations, it was just so ugly that making up that much ground in that respect wasn't really possible. My hope is that over the next few years, we can come to a common ground on things like a pitch clock and things like service time manipulation and any number of other things that I think, everyone within, inside the Overton window can agree would make baseball better, so long as we can all agree to it, within reason. So that's a long-winded answer. I think baseball's, generally speaking, in a good position because its conception is perfect. Like, baseball fundamentally is the perfect game. It's beautiful. It's simple. It's complicated. It's nuanced. It's delicious in every conceivable way. But like sometimes, and I think now in some cases, it's easy to sort of sully it. Like, right, it's easy to not to ruin the game, because I don't think it will ever be ruined. But I think the game can be cheapened. And right now, I think we're sort of teetering on that being a possibility. So it's, in charge, it's in the responsibility of those in charge to get it right. The example I'll use across sports is like the NFL figured out a long time ago that more passing, more scoring was good for the game, more fantasy football interest, more exciting football games on TV, etc. The NBA figured out, I think sort of through the Golden State Warriors, that this barrage of three-point shooting and all that comes with it makes for a more aesthetically pleasing game. Like, there's so much beauty in what the Golden State Warriors do. Right now, math, which is the driving forces behind both of those two things, has made baseball much less interesting and much less fun, because if you're going to go to a baseball game on any given day, you're probably going to see 6 or 7 different pitchers. The game's going to take 3 hours and 10 minutes. It's going to be 4-2, and you're going to go 3 or 4 minutes between seeing balls put in play. Like Alexander Cartwright is rolling over in his grave if he knew that was happening right now. I mean, he invented baseball when the guys were, they were standing up there with a bat with a split grip and just putting the ball in play. And that's the ethos of baseball. The fundamental skill in baseball is the batted ball. It's putting the ball in play. And that just doesn't happen enough now for my liking. Sure, pitching is phenomenal, but we can still do things to, I think, flatten that curve a little bit. And I think that we should.
No, I think that's great. I mean, based on what you're saying, I would think that you're probably in favor. You appreciate the universal DH and probably want to get rid of the shift as well.
The shift has to go. I think that for 2 reasons. One is obvious. It suppresses offense, and that's just a bad thing, right? So my opinion is that we should have 2 infielders on each side of second base, and their spike should be in the dirt when the ball is released out of the pitcher's hand. I think that will happen, and it should happen soon. There's a second part of that, though, that I find really interesting, and it's the visual element of it. So if whether you're either in the stadium or watching on TV, there's something beautiful about showing up at the ballpark or that, sort of aerial view of the infield where you see these, 8 players sort of plus the pitcher, like just sort of fanned out perfectly, like sort of equidistant from each other and at least traditionally. And there's something glorious about the specks of people in those spots, especially when you're sitting up in the 400 level and you see like, oh yeah, that's where they're all supposed to go. That's part of baseball's inherent beauty. When you see Manny Machado, the third baseman, throwing someone out from right center field, that's visually jarring. That's ugly to me. And just because they're allowed to do it doesn't mean I should like that they do it. Sure, if I was running the team, I would have my third baseman with a cannon playing right center field. But this isn't slow pitch softball. This is baseball. And if shifting was a thing 150 years ago, like that would have been a rule then. They just, we have to sort of adapt, right? We can create a Bill of Rights here. So in my judgment, the shift absolutely has to go. I actually favored the National League brand of baseball, but I'm willing to acknowledge that pitchers hitting just like no one was coming to the game for that purpose. And so I think 5 years from now, we'll forget that ever happened. The one thing that you're going to have a tough time bringing me over on, though, is the electronic strike zone. I'm a big fan of the relationship between the umpire, the pitcher, the catcher, and the manager. And to me, if you get rid of that sort of interpersonal play, baseball becomes much too, for lack of a better term, robotic. I think there's something kind of inherently nice about the umpire being the villain, right? Being the guy that you can sort of rally against, right? And that's a role that they play, and they're well compensated for it. I think that's a valuable thing. I think there's a valuable thing in catcher pitch framing and pitchers nibbling to see how much they can get away with. In an experienced hitter like Joey Votto getting that call on that pitch that's right on the black, even though, like, for the most part, any rookie would be rung up on the same thing. And then the manager chirping at the umpire mid-inning or between innings to try and give his team any sort of 2 or 3 pitch advantage, over the next 9 innings, whatever. I think that's a dynamic that I'm not willing to lose, or at least if I'm going to lose it, I need to be convinced without a shadow of a doubt that it works in the minor leagues and that all that interpersonal stuff I'm not missing. But to me, like, baseball is not going to be improved by making it smarter, for lack of a better term. In what way has all this StatCast information and has all of the shifting and has all of the math made baseball better. I mean, it's made baseball smarter, but those aren't equal. Like, to me, like, there's some sort of blissful ignorance about how baseball used to be played before we knew that you shouldn't allow your pitcher to throw 130 pitches, right? Like, we can keep some of that stuff. Baseball is meant to be enjoyed, serves no other purpose.
And given our talk of like baseball being meant to be enjoyed, sports being meant to be enjoyed and not just, thought through, what are some of the moments that you can go back to in your life that like were formative as far as like your like enjoyment of sports, or like even like I want to make this my career? Like, what are some of those moments you pull back, go back to?
Well, I think a lot of that was just fueled by my playing.
Sure.
I mean, I was a reasonably good baseball player, as has been established. I was a bad basketball player and a bad golfer and a bad soccer player, but I always enjoyed playing sports. So more than anything, that probably informed my, present day career. I grew up at a time in which like Philadelphia sports talk radio was just like on one, and I like consumed that hours and hours, endlessly every single day. So I would say like that experience definitely fueled it. And I would say the Phillies getting really good when I was, 16, 17 years old went a long way too. Like, baseball will never be that magical for me again, to use that phrase. I mean, like, there was no better experience I had than like running around like a lunatic on Broad Street after the Phillies won the World Series in 2008. I actually flew home from Cedarville University that night for the parade, believe it or not, and made it like an hour before the game ended. Like, I'll remember that forever. When the Eagles won the championship in 2017, I was an ESPN employee. I watched that game in Connecticut. It was awesome, but like, it wasn't quite like that. And I went down to Disney World actually the next day just by chance, and Nick Foles was there, and he was on the float. Like, those were wonderful things. But what I would tell parents, which I'll be someday, and any number of other young people that might be listening, like, enjoy sports as much as you can while you're young, because there is absolutely no guarantee that it'll ever feel that way again. Like, that's perhaps I wouldn't say deterioration as a fan, but I definitely don't consume sports the same way that I used to, is in part because of my job, right? It's also just because like it's not magical anymore. It's not mythical anymore. It's in part because I have so much, I have like a database of knowledge now and an endless supply of information, right? So like I'm not like, you watch the game with a more critical eye, through a more critical lens, but like, you also evolve throughout your life, and your tastes might, I used to like punk rock music more than anything else in the world. Now I only listen to it on the Peloton, right? The same goes for sports. Like, I might wind up spending the second half of my life as just a casual sports fan. I mean, I don't know. I mean, right now I still love sports, or at least love what I do. And I enjoy watching my team play as often as I can. But I would tell young people, enjoy sports as much as you can, so long as your brain is telling you that this is something you love, because like, you might lose it and you might never get it back again. And it's also something that I tell young people when they ask about working in sports. I say, just be prepared. There's a chance that what was once your favorite thing in the world, something that you connected with leisure, once it becomes your job, it just changes forever. It doesn't make it worse, but it just makes it different. And if you don't want your fandom to change at all, you should consider, doing something else. And then when you get home at night after work, that's when you watch the games and you can yell at your TV. Because I definitely don't do that anymore. Like, there are very few things in life where like you can sort of chronicle the passage of time based upon where you were, or how you consumed something, or how you remember something you saw on TV, right? Like, that's like the moon landing for older people. But you can remember individual games, individual plays from games, and you don't remember anything else that happened in your life that year, right? That's
very true.
Something that only sports can say. Like, I don't remember where I was when I watched 60 Minutes when I was 9, or watched anything else. But like, I can tell you exactly where I was when I saw Chase Utley hit a grand slam the first time he batted. Like, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But sports is sort of powerful in that sense, and like, that's something that's sacred. So if you're a fan, I always tell people to hang on to it as long as you have it.
That's good. All right. Well, we appreciate you being on the show so much. Thank you for your time. We appreciate all of your insight. And again, we also just appreciate all the work that you do on ESPN. Where can people find you outside of just being on TV? And is there social media that people should follow you on?
Yeah, Google me. No,
there
I'm kidding.
go.
You can
There it is.
you can find me on Twitter at Paul Hembo. That's primarily where I do all of my damage. So I appreciate you guys letting me on, having some fun with sneaky Hembo time. It was a blast. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it a lot.
Later, man.
Thanks, Paul.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for lots more content. And if you enjoyed this video, This video right here is an interview we did on our podcast with helmet artist Armando Villarreal. He custom painted over 100 helmets for Utah, so go check that video out next. Thanks.